In order to spark maximum outrage, I'll start this segment outright by saying yes, the science shows that liberal women have a tendency to be mentally ill, and they are substantially more likely to be unhappy. But there's a lot to break down in what all of this means. A few months ago, Tucker Carlson was asked about being called a racist. He said, "Racist? I have no problem with black people. My problem is with liberal women." And the media loved it. They said Tucker Carlson admits he has a problem with liberal women. And looking at that, you'd say that Tucker Carlson is a sexist. But hold on. Once again, the issue is not about an immutable characteristic. It's not about the sex of the individual. It's about the political leanings of the individual, which is interesting. In these studies, we find that it's liberal women and often liberal men who are more likely to be mentally ill or unhappy. In fact, it is the liberal which actually separates whether or not someone will be happy or unhappy, which I find quite fascinating. In a new study published by Unheard, we can see that conservative women, 61%, say they're completely satisfied with their family life, whereas somewhere around the low 30% of liberal women say the same thing. So it is not about being a woman. It is, in fact, about being a conservative or a liberal. Now, the politics are amorphous and they change quite a bit. But Tucker Carlson makes a point that when you break it down, there is something about being a liberal that makes people angry, unhappy, or mentally ill, or that people who are mentally ill, angry, and unhappy tend to be liberal. It can go either way. I suppose you can decide for yourself. But a story like this really exemplifies something. This woman, who behind the scenes was saying racist things, was lying to the public, which makes me wonder about why someone is going to be angry and unhappy, mentally ill, and have a correlation with being liberal. And now, as circuitous and as confusing as this can be, it comes back to modern media. What we see is a big story, another big story today, that Democrats created a fake news network to push Democrat ideas and prop up Democrat candidates. And Democrats fall for this stuff. In a tweet from Lauren Boebert mocking Joe Biden, high-profile liberal personalities believed she originated the gaffe. You may be familiar with it. Joe Biden said, "I have two words, made in America." In response, everybody started making fun of Joe Biden, including Lauren Boebert, who said, "Two words, let's go, Brandon." I think we made a similar joke on Timcast IRL, mocking Joe Biden. But if you are someone who lives in a world of lies and deception, and you just believe the lies from the corporate press, you will probably believe you're on the right side. Or perhaps it's fair to say that if you are more likely to have a mental illness, you will be more easily deceived by all of this. I want to pause and just say, honestly, I don't know. I don't know cause correlation, which comes first. I can only show you the science, the data, and it's real. I can give you my personal opinions on this and what it means, but what we can really say is we have several studies. Women, liberal women, tend to be more unhappy. Liberal women, more than 50% report having mental illnesses. And a study from Yale showing that liberals talk down to minorities. So when the right says the left are the real racists, the left are unhappy and all that stuff, yeah, there's something true there. And maybe it has nothing to do with the words liberal or conservative. Maybe what this is really about is that these words liberal and conservative don't really mean anything other than tribe. And after a long enough period of time and a shift in politics, many people who used to be liberal now find themselves being called conservatives, and thus conservatives tend to be the more well-rounded faction when it comes to modern politics. We're going to read the news a little bit, but I want to talk to you namely about the fact that liberal women tend to be unhappy, tend to be mentally ill, and liberals apparently tend to be racist as well. Maybe this is just political propaganda. I don't know. But when I was reading this news story about this woman, Nuri Martinez, I thought, why do things like this happen all the time? And why do people fall for this? Why do people march behind individuals claiming to support BLM who turn out to be racist? Where is your discerning thought pattern? Where are the individuals? And there it is. The people who have the ability to separate fact from fiction, who do the fact checking and who are of sound mind, tend to drift away from these kinds of politics. So maybe the reality is those who are mentally ill tend to fall into democratic politics because they're easily manipulated. But let's read. Before we get started, my friends, head over to timcast.com and become a member to support our work as a member. You'll get access to the Uncensored Members Show from Timcast IRL, as well as Cast Castle and Tales from the Inverted World, and you'll be supporting our journalists directly. Our journalists write the news every day, and it's only because you are members that we're able to keep doing this. So don't forget to also smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Now let's read. And I'll start by briefly mentioning the story about Nury Martinez resigning. Again, the point here is she is a Democrat. She is in office, but behind the scenes, she's racist, calling some guy's son a monkey and saying that some people were, quote unquote, with the blacks. Very offensive. And it resulted in fear of rioting, so much so that a battalion of police officers were mobilized to protect her home. Andy No reports her house last night was being protected from leftist rioters following the audio leak. She was one of the LA City Council members who pushed for the same police to be defunded by others. And now we get to the start of where my mind was lingering today. I thought about this and I was like, this woman's a racist. But they call Tucker Carlson a racist? And then it all started to draw this line. And then I was like, man, we have these studies showing liberal women are unhappy, they're mentally ill. And then we have all these stories about them behind the scenes being racist. From The Independent, Tucker Carlson admits he hates white liberal women more than anything. I'm not mad at black people. July 7th, 2022. So let's begin. Let's begin the narrative arc. From The Washington Post. White liberals dumb themselves down when they speak to black people. A new study contends. A new study, yes, from Yale. Bigthink.com. So that was The Washington Post. We also have bigthink.com. White liberals dumb down speech when talking to minorities. The study examined how Democratic and Republican presidential candidates used language when speaking to black and white audiences. A second study focused on how white people use language in emails to strangers with stereotypically white or black names. The lead researcher called the findings kind of an unpleasant surprise. Now, this plays into the first story. The science backs it up and then links us to the Tucker Carlson story. And Tucker calls out liberal women for which he is smeared. So let's get into the crux of the thesis here. From unheard.com. Why are liberals less happy than conservatives? Now, first, when you look at figure 1 in this graph here, using YouGov data posted by Unheard, we can see that the unhappiest group among the four, liberal women. 15% completely satisfied with life, compared to 19% of liberal men, 32% of conservative men, and 31% of conservative women. So conservative men tend to be the most satisfied. But let's read. They say liberals, especially liberal women, are significantly less likely to be happy with their lives and satisfied with their mental health compared to their conservative peers aged 18 to 55. This is the big takeaway from the 2022 American Family Survey, a striking new poll from YouGov and the Deseret News, which found that liberals are about 15 percentage points less likely to be completely satisfied with their lives. The survey goes on to find that liberals are about 18 points less likely to be completely satisfied with their mental health than conservatives. So once again, now we're getting into mental illness. Figure 2, liberals less satisfied with mental health, completely satisfied with mental health by sex and ideology percentage. We can see that conservative men and women are the same at 36%. Liberal men are at 21 and liberal women are the lowest at 15. This is a major important point. Women, white, black, religion, those don't appear to be the characteristics which define whether someone will be happy. In fact, the characteristic that defines happiness appears to be liberal or conservative. They go to mention liberals are less happy with family life, according to figure 3, completely satisfied with family by sex and ideology. Liberal women are at 36% compared to 61% of conservative women and 49% of conservative men. Now, this is relative. These polls are comparative, comparing liberal women to conservative women. But when we actually get into the science, we notice something particularly interesting. And that is that liberal women tend to have higher rates of mental illness. I'll jump to this one. Actually, you know what? I'll address this tweet right here real quick as we move on. One thing I noticed, and this plays into the media, which I want to get into in a second, but, I kind of misorganized here. When you see that conservative women are more satisfied with family life than liberal women, and then you see videos like this. Alex Stein tweeted, "This song is absolutely insane to listen to. It's a rap song about women getting abortions because they don't want to have baby daddies." Well, okay. I wonder if there is something to do with abortion as to why conservative women are more satisfied. But here we go. Let's just get into it. From the Washington Free Beacon. White liberals more likely to have mental health problems. Majority of young white female liberals have a diagnosed mental health condition, according to Pew Research. Now, I've shown you the Unheard report, showing that liberals, male or female, are less happy than conservatives, with liberal women being the more unhappy of the group. We now have this story from just about a year and a half ago. It says, white liberals are significantly more likely than other racial and ideological groups to be diagnosed with a mental health condition, according to science. According to the science. The findings from Pew Research Center survey, published in March 2020, were the subject of a recent Twitter thread that inspired an EV magazine article on the possible scientific correlation between progressive ideas and mental illness. According to the survey, white liberals of all ages were more likely to have been diagnosed with a mental health condition compared with their moderate and conservative peers. The disparity was especially pronounced among young people aged 18 to 29, the most annoying demographic and the one with the worst opinions, generally speaking. Well, I appreciate your opinion on the matter, Andrew Stiles, but I can certainly say that's one of the most vocal when it comes to cancel culture and social media. They say nearly half of young white liberals, 46%, reported being diagnosed with a mental health condition. That was significantly higher than the percentage of young white moderates at 26% and young white conservatives, 21%, who reported a mental health diagnosis. Young white people who identified as very liberal were considerably more likely to report mental health problems. Now stop. Here we can see it again. The through line is that liberals as a whole tend to have higher rates of mental illness, be it male or female, with liberal women having the highest rates. In fact, I believe liberal women are the only group rated as having more than 50% say they've been diagnosed with a mental health condition. EV Magazine wrote April 13th, 2021, over 50% of liberal white women under 30 have a mental health issue. Are we worried yet? No, okay, let me clarify. Liberal women over a certain age are less likely to have reported mental health issues. But let's get an actual graph here. It's from March 19th to March 24th, 2020. This is what people were using in their reference. Now, it's hard to see here on the left, but I'll explain. Zach Goldberg said, some of you asked for it, so here is the last chart broken down by gender. The biggest gap within age X ideological group is between white liberal men and women. White liberal men report 33.6% report having been diagnosed with a mental health condition between the ages of 18 and 29. 30 and 49 is 29.7. 50 to 64 is 18.7. 65 plus is 15. As you get older, the number of people reporting mental health diagnoses goes down. That means that when these 18 to 29-year-olds who are reporting very high rates of mental illness diagnoses, when they're in their 65s, that number will stay the same because they're the same age group. But here we can see white liberal women have the highest rates among all demographics relative to men, relative to moderate or conservative. That means that there is something about being a woman, because across the board, you can see that women do report higher rates of mental illness diagnosis, but it is liberal, between liberal men and women, reporting higher rates. So if you are liberal, you have higher rates. That's it. The more conservative you get, the lower the rate of diagnosed mental illness. Some have argued the answer to this is actually quite simple. And it's that conservatives are unwilling to go to the doctor. Actually, there's a different answer. And it may be that people who have diagnosed mental illnesses are more susceptible to manipulation and less likely to discern reality. Conservatives who are more discerning and act more logically than liberals, or I should say people who are more discerning and act more logically, just probably are more conservative. This is the thing. In response to I don't know if I have the tweet pulled up from Unheard, talking about the unhappiness. Matthew Iglesias, formerly of Vox, says, could it actually be that unhappy people tend to be liberal? that people who are unhappy with the status quo say, I'm going to vote Democrat to vote for change, whereas people who are happy with the way things are don't want them to change. It's a fair point, but it does not account for mental illness, only happiness. In fact, I think the fact that white liberal women tend to be more unhappy and tend to be more mentally ill shows where the party is going to go, not what the party is doing to people. That is to say, if your party is predominantly of these people, well, I should rephrase that. I should correct myself. I think that if you have a political party dominated by people who are more mentally ill and people who are more unhappy, they will be the driving voice of what this party does. And it will become increasingly more unhinged and then rope more people into an increasingly unhinged ideology. From Vox.com, 2018. Republicans have a millennial women problem. Nearly 70% of young women say they are leaning toward Democratic candidates in the midterms. It's hard to concisely identify this and bring it all together. But the point is quite simple. 70% of millennial women are voting Democrat. Or I should say, yes, 70% of millennial women vote Democrat. And that means they tend to have high rates of mental illness. These Democratic female voters, and the males do too. Here's my point. When people claim that Tucker Carlson is racist or the people on the right are racist or sexist or whatever, what I think is actually happening is that liberal and conservative don't actually mean anything anymore. Look, by all accounts, 10 years ago, I was a liberal. Some people are trying to, they say, in 2012, libertarian, 2016, MAGA, 2020, apocalypse, civil war, all that stuff. And they're like, hey, like Tim Pool. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was a Bernie bro. I was ranting about Bernie Sanders and, look, he on gun policy, he was moderate. He was for a secure border. That wasn't a libertarian position. But here's what ends up happening. Over a long enough period of time, if you have a group of people with a higher rate of mental illness saying things that are nonsensical, you have a higher rate of people who are more willing to believe whatever they see on TV, you are going to get a political faction that is in a death spiral. You have someone lying, someone believing that lie, repeating the lie, and then the lie gets mangled and manipulated through a cycle of unhappiness, anger, violence, and mental illness. And that has become liberal. Liberal didn't used to mean that. Liberal meant, like live and let live. There was a tweet I saw from Matthew Iglesias, again, of Vox. Apparently I follow the guy a lot, huh? How about that? And he said it was funny that bread and butter conservatives now have the position of protecting girls' sports when, 10 or so years ago, they wanted to get rid of it outright. Or maybe 20 years ago. The idea was that Title IX shouldn't protect the funding for women's sports. And all of a sudden they're like, protect women's sports from transgender ideology. And my response was, it's because liberals quit. It's because liberals quit the Democratic Party and said the Republicans are making more sense. Republicans responding to the expansion of their voter base became slightly more moderate. This all comes together. Conservatives, for some reason, have drifted moderate. They're okay with gay marriage. They're defending women's sports. And people are surprised by this. Many of these liberals, older ones, who can't seem to realize what's going on, think they're talking about Newt Gingrich and John McCain. But that Republican Party is long since gone. I know Newt Gingrich is still commenting, but that is long gone. There's a new political party. Former Democrats, former liberals said, I'm not voting for you. It doesn't mean they're conservatives. But now, because these people are being called conservative, people like me, what is left is liberals and Democrats correlating directly with mental illness and unhappiness. And among many liberal women. So it is not wrong to say if 56% of millennial liberal women are mentally ill, there's a tendency towards that. I don't mean a majority across the board because, as I pointed out, among older 30 to 49, it's only 39%. Among 50 to 64, it's 26. And among 65 plus, it's 15. So it does go down a bit. But there is a tendency relative to other factions among females to be more mentally ill. And again, it's this. Liberal is the defining factor because you can see it across the board. However, liberal women have a higher tendency. And that's what it is. Now, take a look at the modern Democratic Party. If millennial women in great numbers are supporting all of this, you have to wonder what it's all about. All right, here's a story. Democrats create fake local news sites in swing states ahead of midterm elections. The operation stealthily boosts Democrat candidates and attacks Republican candidates. They fall for it. Now, of course, NewsGuard does mention there is a Republican version of this, but the Republicans, honestly, not as good at it. There was a profile on some woman a while ago, a few years ago, where she had created another version of this. They do it a lot. But you know what? Okay, fine. Fair point. Republicans have their version in like the Tennessee Star or whatever these websites are. They're conservative sites acting like local news. Or I should say they're local news websites with a conservative perspective. I think there's a lot of problems there. But okay, fine. Let's break down how this cult emerges. Here it is. End Wokeness tweets LMAO at Lauren Boebert baited the blue checks into mocking Biden's latest gaffe. Lauren Boebert's a Republican conservative woman. She tweeted 2 words. Let's go, Brandon. But hey, you may be thinking, that's 3 words. That's the joke. Because Joe Biden said, math is, I have 2 words. Made in America. The headline of this Washington Examiner article from October 7th, math is hard. Biden has 2 words made in America. The funny thing is, that's what they're actually saying about Lauren Boebert, that you can't do math. Here's what this proves. Now, these are dudes, mind you. David Hogg, Chip Franklin, George Takei, John Cooper. They're all making fun of Lauren Boebert. These people clearly don't even know what their own president, the one they support, says. Who would fall for something like that? Mentally ill people. What will that do? It will make them unhappy. Primarily, it's affecting women. Why? Honestly, I don't know. But maybe it has something to do with, for some reason, liberal women are just less likely to watch the news. So they don't know. I can tell you this. In this channel, for instance, viewership is like 10% female. It's like 11%, I think. It's 89% male. Surprised? Why would you be? Timcast IRL, I think it's actually about 20% female. So that's actually 1 in 5 viewers is female. For whatever reason, that's the way it is. So I wonder why. Maybe it's because there is social pressure towards fitting in. We see this with Instagram. Women are more likely to face anxiety and depression due to Instagram than men. Maybe there is a male-female difference in that regard. Maybe it's just in order to fit in as a dude, you have options. You can play video games and keep your face quiet covered, or you can do sports. For women, it's mostly about social positioning and fitting in with the status quo, the ideas. Could be wrong. Maybe it's about looking good. There are stories about women who will post a picture of themselves on Instagram. And if they don't get enough likes, they panic, delete it, and then repost a different one, hoping to get more likes. That could be a factor. It could be something to do with being a woman. But I kind of feel like when you see these dudes clearly not watching the news, the key defining factor, it all comes full circle. Liberal versus conservative. Liberals don't know the president they voted for supported this. Millennial women tend to lean liberal. It all just wraps up into a neat little bow, to a neat little bun. I think the defining factor between liberal and conservative today really comes down to, do you read the news? Do you know what's going on? In the end, if women are more driven by social factors between men and women and less, let's put it this way. If they're driven by subjective measures and not objective measures, then you are likely going to see this play out exactly as it is. There are many conservative women. They have families. Apparently, they're very happy with their families. Women who are married tend to be more conservative. So it all just is really fascinating. Now, I suppose the thumbnail in the title will be some kind of bait, pointing out obvious studies that show the science. I called it the science on purpose. But really what I'm kind of getting at is all of this in one big whirlpool. I described this way a few years ago, that the left, the wokeness, is like this spiral that's going faster and faster and spinning out of control. And eventually it ejects people. These people are forced, red-pilled, and wake up. The way I see it, you have people like David Hogg. We'll use him as an example. He's a guy, of course, right? So that's why I said liberal and conservative is more defining. 3 words, you're an idiot. Did David Hogg not know the news? George Takei, does he not know the news? Do they not watch Biden speak? Apparently they don't. They then tweet these things out. Lauren Boebert is so dumb, she did X. People who don't pay attention to the news and just get their information filtered through personalities they find agreeable will now go on believing that thing. Larry Elder went on Timcast IRL, and he told us that he tried showing evidence to his friends, to a friend of his, that Trump did not say Nazis were very fine people. His friend said, I will not read it. He tried reading it. He got discernibly angry. I don't want to read this. I don't know. Is that mental illness? Is that some kind of weird social behavior? Honestly, I don't know. What I do know is new data from today shows liberal women are unhappier. Data from a while ago shows liberal women tend to have mental illness. And then we can see over and over again, these people don't read the news. Maybe that's why they're unhappy. In the Unheard study, they also find that conservatives are less focused on worldly issues and more focused on family issues. Maybe that's why they are happier. Maybe many of these liberal people, they're being lied to. They won't accept they're being lied to. They prefer the comforting lies and they prefer the anger. So I don't know. It's hard to understand what this is because it's more than just mental illness. It's more than just politics. It's more than just gender. It's more than just rage. But there is a correlation when you look at all of these things together that shifts all of that negativity, anger, distrust, and ignorance into one space. And that's ultimately what you get with today's modern liberal movement. And that's why I was liberal and now I'm called a conservative. Despite the fact that my politics would land me center left liberal, I'm still called far right or conservative because these words are meaningless. The tendency is if you want to fit in with what is deemed liberal, you'll just say it. So I'll bring up that Jon Stewart segment. You may have seen the problem with Jon Stewart where he says, what is a woman? It's fascinating because he never actually answers the question. In the viral segment, Jon Stewart says, it was only 10 or 20 years ago, people were making reductive jokes about the issue of gender. So hold on there, Jon Stewart. In this segment, Jon Stewart approaches the definition of what is a woman from a social construct perspective. He goes on to list alpha, beta, gamma, males, soy boys, tomboys, and whatever. And says, look at the spectrum of men and women. As if that defines men and women at all, in any way. This is Jon Stewart being in the cult. Either he chooses to ignore reality and actually address the question. What does woman mean? Well, there's a simple definition, adult human female. You want to talk about the subcategories of adult human females and what it means to be a woman or means to be a man, by all means have that conversation. But this is why I say it's a cult. And cults, they target people who are unwell. They target people who are unhappy. You got to lie to them and keep them in the dark. That's how cults work. So there it is. I don't know. Admittedly, I feel like I'm a bit all over the place. But seeing that story about that Nuri Martinez, I'm like, how do people fall for this over and over again? Okay, let's just go for it, right? Jussie Smollett was a hoax. Ahmaud Arbery was a hoax. Ukrainegate was a hoax. Russiagate was a hoax. The Covington Catholic kids, that was a hoax. Hands up, don't shoot. That was a hoax. The Trayvon Martin stuff, all of that was a hoax. The Jussie Smollett one is just mind blowing. That people actually believed that a D-list celebrity walking around at 3 a.m. in a non-residential part of Chicago was attacked by 2 Trump supporters. They believed it. And that's because they don't want to read the news. They want to just believe it. I don't know why, man. Maybe you can't break them out because they're mentally ill. I'm not trying to be mean to people who are mentally ill. I'm not trying to be mean to women. I'm not trying to be mean to liberals. I don't think liberal is the defining issue. I think liberal is just a misappropriated word that is now being associated with mental illness and unhappiness, anger. It's why Antifa is going around with no real rhyme or reason and just smashing things. It's just become rage. I described it this way several years ago, a chaotic and destructive force. I say it's chaotic because there's no way to satiate this. There's no direct goals. This woman, this Nuri Martinez, apparently is racist, but just goes and lies about it. Grifters. There's a viral video of Hassan Piker being asked about boxing Sam Hyde. And he starts insulting this small guy and getting in his face. And I'm just like, why is that? What is it with these people they behave this way? Why won't they come and sit down and have a conversation? It is a social drive, not a logical one. It is an emotional social drive. It is mental illness. It is all of these things. I don't think we're going to get anywhere by trying to have conversations with people who don't read the news, who aren't mentally well, who are just angry and emotional. So how do you solve the problem? Man, I really don't have the answer for you on that one. But I'm just sick and tired of reading these stories, you know? When I hear a story like, Kanye West comes out, he's had a bunch of crazy things. I'm like, yeah, come on, man. Look, we can talk about Kanye saying some good things, but he put up some tweet about DEFCON 3 against Jewish people. And I'm like, the dude is still in that sphere of that space. He's just kind of started reading the news and has called out some things that are obvious and bought into a whole bunch of insane things. What I mean is when he talks about like Trump and the economy, I was like, yeah, obviously. But when Kanye comes out and says weird stuff about Jewish people directing Diddy or whatever, it's like, okay, bro, you're reading nonsense. You're believing nonsense. You can go too far. That's a reality too. Not everybody on the right is a saint. The right has its mental illness as well. You can argue that everybody has their mental illness. The right has some, the left has more. I wonder. I really do. I'll break it down for you. Reading these news stories, it all just comes back to, why is it 2018? White liberal women tend to be Democrat. Tucker Carlson, I got a problem with white liberal women. Mental illness among white liberal women, among liberal women in general. Higher rates. Liberal woman resigns. Turns out she's racist and she was lying about it the whole time. Look, it happens among guys. The resignation, I don't think is necessarily indicative of just males or females. I think it really comes down to liberal or conservative. And then to break down the understanding of what liberal and conservative is today, it has nothing to do with politics. I can say I'm pro-progressive tax and pro-choice and they'll still call me a conservative. What does that mean? If you want to be a liberal, you must blindly agree with whatever insane and unhinged position they present, even if it makes no sense. But I can sit down with a conservative and I can disagree on everything, and they'll call me a liberal. Therein lies the big problem. The colloquial liberal doesn't mean what people think it means. So anyway, I guess I'll just leave it there. This was not necessarily like a hard news segment. It's kind of all over the place, but you get the point. I was just reading these studies. I saw this unheard thing about liberal women being so unhappy, and I'm like, man, what's causing that? And then I remembered that they have a higher rate of mental illness, and I'm like, these are unhappy, mentally ill people, and they're voting. So how do we solve for that? As a society, we need to. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.